All right, so we closed that last segment with this midrash on Vatiftach Vatirehu et Hayeled, where Rashi gave two ways to read the pasuk. He said the simple meaning is of pasuk vav, Vatiftach Vatirehu et Hayeled, is that she opened it, meaning the basket, and she saw him, the boy. The way Rashi expressed that was at the Mira Ata, whom did she see? At Hayela, the boy. So the boy is just clarifying the meaning of the who from before. We wrote it in English over here, and she saw him, meaning the boy. There's a grammar term for this, if anyone's curious, called apposition. And then Rashi added, though, Midrasho Shira'ata Imo Shechina. According to the Midrash, she saw God's presence, the Shechina of God, with the boy in the basket. And so we pointed out that's reading two things differently. It's reading the Hu and Vatir Ehu as him with a capital H, meaning God. And it's taking the word et to mean with, which it means in a minority of psukim. So she saw God with the boy. We then decided we have to take a step back and ask ourselves, okay, if we know that the Midrash does all these different things that we've been discussing all along here, right? It tells us that Amram and Yocheved had been previously married. It tells us that Moshe filled the house with light when he was born. It tells us that Baal Paro's arm extended when she wanted to It miraculously extended when she was trying to pull in the basket. And then it tells us that Hashem's presence was with Moshe in the basket. What's the larger idea these Midrashim are getting at? So at least the last three of them, numbers 2, 3, and 4, seem to be pointing to one larger issue here, which is the absence of God in the simple pshat of the parak. If we look at this parak over here, just in terms of its simple pshat, so, truth is, in general, names are missing. That was something we didn't talk so much about in class, but it's worth thinking about. That even people whose names we know from elsewhere, like Yocheved, Amram, and Miriam, are nameless. The first real name we get in this parak is Moshe, when he is dramatically called Moshe, Kimin Hamayim Mishitiu. Right? Baal Paro dramatically calls him Moshe because she dragged him out of the water. Then the pasuk Yud. But God is absent completely. There doesn't even seem to be some hint without his name of the idea that some greater power was protecting them. And in fact, we looked back for a minute to the previous parak, and we observed that lo and behold, in parak Aleph as well, we're now back in parak Aleph, that in parak Aleph as well, there we had names, right? We had all the names of Yaakov's kids, but we had the names of the Me'aldot, Shifra and Pua. But what we don't really have much of is the name of God. The one time we encounter God in this chapter, his name appears a couple of times with regard to the Mialdot. We're told the Mialdot feared God, that God, we discussed that was the more distant name of God, the more universal name of the Supreme Being. And because they disobeyed him, and therefore God rewarded them, right? And one last time, because they feared him, he made them batim, he made them houses. So God appeared 3 times in the previous parak, but all with regards to the mialdot. And we observe that that means basically in plain English that God was absent to the people who are suffering. After all, these mialdot, it's not even clear if these mialdot themselves are Jewish, right? A lot of you argued on the test that when they're referred to as Mialdot HaEvriyot, many of you preferred Abarbanel's explanation. That means Mialdot who served the Ivriyot. Hebrew midwives, meaning midwives who served in the community of the Hebrews. They worked in that local hospital in Goshen, but not that they themselves were of Hebrew descent. So if that's the case, actual Bnei Israel don't have God's name mentioned with them in Parak Aleph or early Parak Bet, and that reflects the fact that in their experience they feel like God is absent. Right? God made a covenant with the Avod that Bnei Israel are going to be his people, and right now they're suffering, they're slaves, Paro's killing their babies, they're being terribly persecuted, And they're asking themselves the same thing that many Jews have asked themselves in many times of tragedy. Most recently, I would say, during the Holocaust, but you don't have to go to that extreme of suffering. If you read literature from the time of the Inquisition, we've noticed certain things in Rashi's commentaries that maybe allude to the Crusades that they went through in his times. Any time where people are suffering terribly as a nation, and they're supposed to be God's chosen people, they're going to ask themselves, what happened to our chosenness? What happened to our special relationship with God? And the people feel that God is absent, and that's reflected in the fact that the way the Torah tells the Bnei Israel story, God is absent. And yet, God is there in the background, right? These Mialdot, so they end up doing their job despite Paro's order. And therefore, if you need to have a baby, you call Shifra, you call Pua, and they deliver you a healthy baby. So you don't see God in that, because you just figure Shifra and Pua are doing what you paid them to do. They're midwives, and that's what a midwife does. But really, if you knew the full story, you'd realize that Shifra and Pua should have killed your baby. And it's only because the two of them are God-fearing women that they stood up to Paro and delivered your baby. And as we discussed, God then tries to reward them. And one reading of this pasuk is that the tova, the good that God did for them, was that people multiplied more, which the way some of Farshim understands it means God is rewarding them by helping them, making sure that once they risk their life to deliver a baby, God makes sure that baby stays healthy. So in fact, God, in partnership with the Mialdot, is turning around what should be a time of horrible murder and genocide of babies, and instead making it into a time where more and more babies are being born. But the people don't know what Paro had told the midwives, so they don't perceive that God is doing anything here. And it seems that Rashi is trying to convey a similar idea by quoting all these Midrashim in our Perek. We go back to Perek Bet now. So people are wondering, what's going on here? Rashi first is acknowledging, yes, this was such a terrible decree that people like Amram and Yocheved didn't even want to get married. But nevertheless, in all these subtle ways, God is making his presence felt. Right? When Moshe comes out, God gives this subtle hint. Suddenly the house is all radiant, it's all filled with light, and they know there's something special about this kid. And then, Chazal take what at face value is just Bat Paro extending her arm, Amata, sending her maidservant, and they make it into a miracle, as if to say, God is doing miracles here, even though it's a little thing, right? Bat Paro anyway has servants, or she could just swim over there, but instead it comes out miraculously. Her arm gets stretched out the length of many amot, like many arms lengths, go gadget arms. And finally, when she looks into the basket, says the Midrash, she sees Hashem present with the basket. And that really caps it all off. What the Midrash is trying to get at with all these lessons is that, according to the Pshat, according to the simple level of the Psukim, it seems like God has basically abandoned Bnei Israel, other than what he's doing discreetly with the Mialdot in the previous chapter, because that's how the people perceive it. But says the Midrash, on a deeper level, even though the people perceive that God has abandoned them, in fact, he has a plan which does involve a period of servitude, a period of enslavement and suffering, but he's already turning the wheels of redemption here. He's already preparing for the birth of the man who 80 years later is going to take them out. And so as much as it seems like they're suffering, God is doing all these little things, symbolized by the light in Moshe's parents' home when Moshe is born, or the arm of Bat Paro stretching out a little longer than is naturally possible, or the sense when she opens up the basket that God is with this baby in the basket. That's all a metaphor for the idea that God is with Bnei Israel in this time of trouble. So I think that, we discussed in the previous video how in each case there's some irregularity or vagueness in a word or a phrase or an idea in the pasuk that gives the Midrash this opening to say what it says, but in saying all of these things, it's giving us this bigger picture. And I believe that Rashi himself wanted to convey the same message. That's why even those Midrashim where Rashi himself says, it's not the simple pshat, he tells us the simple pshat of Amma is a maidservant here, according to the rules of Hebrew grammar. But nevertheless, he also wants to quote what Rabbeinu Darshu. He also wants to quote what the rabbi said. And same thing, he tells us that the pshat of it is that she saw him, namely the boy. But nevertheless, he also wants to add this midrash that the Shekhinah was there too, because Rashi thinks this is such an important, meaningful lesson that Hashem was with them. And I mentioned a little bit in class. I'm not sure exactly if Rashi in particular felt this lesson was especially meaningful because he was living through the Crusades. That could be. But it's entirely possible that even if Rashi lived in a different generation, right? Even someone today in America writing a commentary on the Torah, who knows that we in America and in Israel, which between the two of them are the two biggest Jewish communities in the world, even though Jewish life is very vibrant in Israel, not quite the same in America, but in many ways our Jewish life is very vibrant here. We're not persecuted here. Nevertheless, if you're reading a story like this, it's troubling to you to see how the Jews at that time are persecuted and are suffering. And what about the covenant that Hashem made with the Avot? So I think even a rabbi living not during the Crusades might have wanted to share the same message. I don't know if it's necessarily just because of Rashi's time and place, or if whenever Rashi lived, he would have found it valuable to cite these midrashim, even as he himself is telling you that two of them don't fit the pshat, but he thinks their message is so important and so meaningful. If you're in our regular Torah Advanced class, you can stop the video here. If you're in the honors class, we took this one step further. We looked inside the Gemara in Masechet Sota that Rashi based his ideas on, and we noted that Rashi doesn't just quote the Gemara word for word. Rashi, first of all, is much briefer. That's true of Rashi's writing style in general. But in the Gemara, this story of getting Moshe and his parents back together is basically a story about Miriam. What does it mean that Amram went to marry Yocheved? So he went to marry Yocheved. Shalach b'atzat bito. He went on the advice of his daughter. And Gemara explains that Amram was the prominent leader, Gadol Hador, and so when Amram gets divorced, he's very upset. He said, "The Shavanu Amelin, we're working hard to have kids for nothing. Paro's going to kill them." He gets up and divorces his wife. Amdu Kulan v'Gershon Shotein. Everyone wants to be like their Gadol Hador. They all emulate Amram. And so Miriam says to him, "You're destroying everybody. You're destroying our whole Jewish future. Abba kashag zerat chayo termi shel Paro. Your decree is worse than Paro's. Sheparo lo gazar el zacharim. Paro only wanted to kill the boys. You're killing the boys and the girls, because if people don't have kids, they won't have daughters either, not just sons. If you separate couples, there are going to be no Jews in the next generation of either gender. Let's skip a little bit here, but bottom line is, after everything that Miriam says to him, Amad v'achzir et ishto. So Amram takes his wife back, and then everyone else follows suit. Rashi leaves out this whole story. Now it's not clear why, but here we adopted the suggestion of those sort of led by Nechama Leibowitz in our generation, but many earlier Meforshei Rashi say the same thing, that Rashi at the end of the day is looking to give you a relatively straightforward reading of the Psukim, some sort of pshat reading. In Rashi's pshat methodology, he's fine with adding outside information from the Midrash in a way that, say, Ibn Ezra and other pshat Meforshim don't like to do, as long as it's directly contributing to the story. And so over here, he needs, in order to make sense out of the story, to explain why this marriage is really a remarriage. He doesn't need the whole story about Miriam. I'm sure he thought it was a meaningful story. He might have even thought it was a historically true story. But it's just too long and too much of a digression from what he's trying to do in his commentary over here. We further noted with the house filling with light that that's one of several views. Some people say that Tov meant that Moshe's name was either Tov or Tovia. Others say he was born being fit to be a Navi, or that he was born with a Brit Milah. I think here as well, saying, first of all, it is the majority view, the Chachamim, who say that the house was filled with light when he was born. I also think it probably is the view that's most consistent with a simple reading of the Psukim. Again, something is special about this kid, because every mother thinks her baby is good, and yet Yocheved must think something more than that about Moshe. Say he was born with a bris milah would be something like very specifically miraculous and concrete. Say it was his name kind of deviates from the syntax. She saw that he was Tov. Tov is a name. We know his name later is going to be Moshe. It seems those who want to say his name is Tov or Tovia are really driven by a bit of an ideological purpose here. They're bothered by the fact that Moshe's name that we know was given to him by an Egyptian woman. They want him to have a Jewish name from birth. where saying the house was filled with light is kind of a generic way of saying they knew he was special